Well, joining me for this conversation is Scott Heiberger, Health Communications Manager with the National Farm Medicine Center over in Marshfield, Wisconsin. Now, we're not talking about markets for this conversation. Instead, we're going to kick things over to farm safety. Of course, this week is National Farm Safety Week. Scott, can you kind of just talk a little bit about the mission of the center and what it is it does?
Yeah, thanks. We're part of Marshfield Clinic Health System, which covers about two-thirds of Wisconsin, mostly rural areas. And our National Farm Medicine Center was born out of that practice that doctors were seeing injuries and illnesses from patients that were particular to farming. And so a little over 40 years ago, they formalized their efforts into the National Farm Medicine Center. And since then, we've expanded and changed as agriculture has changed. And a big part of our center is a program called the National Children's Center for Rural and Agricultural Health and Safety. And that's where we focus on kids who are both working, trying to match them up with appropriate jobs for their ability levels, and also kids who are not working, because in fact, might be surprising to some people, but it's there are more children under 10 not working who are injured on farms than kids actually doing chores.
So, National Farm Safety Week lands on near the start of the fall harvest season, typically when farm safety kind of gets the most attention. But really, for the center, farm safety is 52 weeks out of the year. So, is there something that is different this time of the year that the center needs to focus on more, or kind of what's the dynamic there?
You're right. You know, that's throughout the season, we're trying to stay in front of people with safety messages. But Farm Safety Week does offer an opportunity in a couple ways for us. We have a lot of colleagues around the country, and some of us have particular specialties and particular agricultural populations or types of agriculture. So it's an opportunity for us to work together with those centers. And it's the time of year where even if you're not a farmer, you know that something's going on. You know, you're driving the roads and there's a lot more activity. And so we also take Farm Safety Week as an opportunity to remind everybody that we need to share the road and watch out for each other.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to get caught up in the statistics for a lot of what's going on with on-farm injuries or just farm-related injuries in general. But kind of what's the leading case of farm-related injuries in the U.S. and maybe talk a little bit about the emotional side of things and not just the statistics either.
Well, that's a great point. Tractors remain number one, and of course, they're coast to coast in all types of agriculture, uh, with both rollovers and also extra riders is an issue. And this time of year, you go to social media, and parents are excited to have their kids with them. They're proud of having their kids in there. They're going to be spending a lot of time in the tractor this time of year and in the combine. And we understand the excitement and wanting to pass on that tradition and share, but we just ask folks to, think twice about bringing that child into the work site. We know it's a tradition, but sometimes traditions fade out, and we need to kind of look at a new way of doing things. And so it's we don't recommend taking children into the work site, and that would even include the tractor cab and combine cab for many reasons. Um, Machinery is always going to be up there as far as a hazard. Children in the work site, we know it's hard. There's not a daycare or childcare on every corner, but that's something we always urge parents to do their best to try to work around and keep the children out of the work site. And you talk about the human side of things. Yeah, statistics only stick so much, and it's hard to remember the exact numbers. But stories, especially stories told peer to peer from farmer to farmer, really hit home. And we actually have a project. It's called it's all one word if you search for it, telling the story project.org. It's a space where farmers can talk about their close calls, their injury events. If in a couple of cases it's a fatality, so you have the survivors talking. And it does a couple things. I think it really gets the attention. We're told by other farmers that it really gets their attention, that it's one thing to read a statistic, but if you hear somebody who's walked in your shoes and has a similar background and similar challenges and similar experience, those stories really hit home and make them stop and examine their own operation and their own procedures, and maybe have them rethink some of those safety procedures. We're also told by the storytellers, as we call them, that it provides kind of a catharsis. It's a way of making sense of a situation. If it's a mishap or a close call, maybe you can use a little humor and laugh about it later, like, boy, that was dumb. I better not do that again. But in a couple of cases, we have stories of fatalities, and it's one way of the survivors being able to make sense of the situation and feel like, well, this has been devastating for our family, but hopefully we can prevent this from happening to somebody else. And again, it's tellingthestoryproject.org. We're excited this fall. Actually, we're working with a couple of universities and communication programs, and they're going to take our Telling the Story Project website and use it in a couple of their writing classes, and get the students maybe producing some content for us, as well as using the stories that are on the website as part of their curriculum, practicing writing press releases and such. So we're excited about that.
Yeah, it's really important to have these conversations. And yeah, it's sobering and disheartening to hear of the times where there's fatalities, but it's also nice when there are stories of close calls where, everything turns out okay. And that can bring up a good message in terms of things to think about moving forward with your own practices and just ensuring the safety on your farm. But when it's coming to those conversations, it's important about how we're talking about these incidents, and particularly it's common to refer to on-farm or farm-related injuries as accidents, but really it seems like the center has moved or is trying to shift that verbiage a little bit. So what is it that you're trying to change over there?
Yeah, thanks. And that's, if you call a injury incident on a farm, if you call it a farm accident, we feel like that kind of discourages any further examination, whether it's the sheriff writing up the report, or whether it's just you and your family or your employees talking about what happened. So if we call it an accident, it makes it easier to sort of say, no one meant for that to happen. It's just an accident. Move on. You wouldn't see that, for instance, in aviation. If there's a plane crash, it's not shrugged off as just an accident. They look at the black box, they recreate everything. Is there anything the pilot could have done? Was there anything maintenance wise, something from the manufacturer? Could anything have been changed? And you have to be sensitive, of course, when you're talking about a farm situation. It's not our intention to be judge and jury and call individuals out and scold them somehow that this was preventable. But we, as people trying to prevent the injuries, do look at everything as preventable potentially, and we do try to find ways that maybe something could have been averted, and then try to share those to share that knowledge, or share the stories, again, farmer to farmer, that hey, this could happen to you, but it is preventable. One thing we do when we work with media, sometimes media are hesitant to call out an individual farmer for a particular injury incident, and rightfully so. So what we coach them to do is to say something like, this is a very common occurrence, or this is a very common situation that farmers across the country face. And so you're not just, picking on one person. And the whole idea of trying to shift this terminology, we feel, actually, we've done a little research on this. We've done some scanning of articles on the internet, and you do tend to see the word accident used in farming much more than you would with a car crash. If you next time you're reading some sort of news report about some sort of car crash, they'll probably call it a car crash. It's much more unusual that they would call it a car accident anymore. And so that's maybe a subtle shift that the average consumer of news hasn't really noticed, but we're trying to do a similar thing with farming. And all of us just think in terms of, is there anything that could have been done to prevent that?
Right. And again, earlier you mentioned that a lot of what the center does is focus on child-related incidents and highlighting those a little bit. So just kind of moving, school has already started up, but it's not always keeping kids off the farm still around this time of the season. So kind of talk a little bit about what parents can do to help with preventative measures and ensuring the safety for their family in general.
As I mentioned earlier, that some people might be surprised to find out that most of the injuries occurring to children on farms are to children under 10 years old who are not working. And a lot of times we attribute that to, you're a parent, you're trying to get work done, and you bring, the 2-year-old or whoever it may be into the work site to, quote, keep an eye on them, figuring, well, they're safer with me than alone or in some other situation. But again, do your best to examine your resources, who you might, at least for your most hazardous work or the work that takes the most concentration. If there's any way you can get that small child out of the workplace, that's something we strongly recommend. And in general, with children, there are also some very good guidelines that can help parents or supervisors of young people to match those kids with the most appropriate job, and giving thought to their physical abilities, their emotional, cognitive abilities. We have checklists. It's called the Agricultural Youth Work Guidelines. Agricultural Youth Work Guidelines. There are over 60 guidelines, and they're kind of in poster format, but you can get them in different mobile and different manners. But it allows a parent to look at a checklist basically and ask themselves, can my child lift 25 pounds? Can my child remember a three-step set of instructions? Things like that. That empowers the parents and helps them put their kids in a good situation. Because we all agree that kids learn so much from farming. They learn so much from farm work. It's a very long list of, responsibility and many other really useful attributes and life skills. And so our point is we just want to set the kids up for success.
Definitely important for taking ownership of our actions on the farm, but kind of looking at just additional resources. You did mention one earlier, but what's other resources that people can go to find a little bit more about the center and especially the efforts that you're focused on?
Yep, correct. Cultivatesafety.org, and people will find almost 300 different resources, but it's all organized so you can find it. It's organized by resources dedicated to working, child play, safety tools, resources. And so hopefully you can, and it's all searchable, so you can type in a keyword of whatever task or question you might have. And again, cultivatesafety.org is our catch-all for all of our resources.
Again, that is Scott Heiberger with the National Farm Medicine Center. Again, thank you, Scott, for this important conversation.
Thanks, Dawson.
Yep, and for those that are getting ready for the harvest season or are already in the middle of it, good luck this season and be safe.